I've always loved pre-grouping liveries, and this really quite light London South Western Railway livery is no exception. Hi there to you, I hope I find you well. It's great to see you again. Welcome back to the channel with me, Jennifer Kirk, up here in the loft on Weir Yard. Now today I'm really excited because one of the models that I've been really looking forward to from the Hornby 2020 Centenary range has finally arrived. Now, of course, as you remember, so many great models were announced, and I got really excited during that live stream where we first learned what Hornby were launching in 2020. And one of those models that I picked out as a must-have item for myself was the T9 Greyhound, but in that really attractive London and South Western Railway green. Now, it has finally arrived, and I've been lucky enough to be able to pick up one of these. So come with me in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories, and I will show you the full ins and outs of this model, and we will also be doing a full DCC fitting guide if you stay with me towards the end of this video. So really excited to show you this. It's such a pretty livery, and you know me, a big sucker for pre-grouping. So let's take a closer look. The London and South Western Railway T9 Greyhound is a model that has been in Hornby's range for a number of years. It was tooled up as a super detailed model and still holds up to modern standards. In the 2020 range, it was announced in this really pretty pre-grouping livery in the London and South Western Railway green. Now, the model has appeared in this livery before, although I believe it was the slightly different version of London and South Western Railway green. There's two different shades, the Uri green and also the Dugald green. So I believe that Hornby haven't replicated the previous release. They've gone for the slightly different shade of green. Now, this is the preserved example, and you can see here it's been produced in association with the National Railway Museum, so we get it in this very distinctive packaging to signify that. Now, I actually don't have, up until now, a T9 in my collection. It's one of the models which I've been meaning to get for quite some time. So actually, when Hornby announced this version, it was an open goal. I really did just have to have this. So I'm going to look on the end there. And what we've got here, you can see it's our 3863 London and South Western Railway T9 class, number 120. It is DCC ready, and it contains an 8-pin decoder socket. And a little bit later on in the video, I'm going to be showing you how to DCC fit this model in association with Trainomatic. And I've got here a wired 8-pin decoder from their range, which is the perfect fit for this model and gives you all the performance that you need. If you want to go down the economy sound route, now what I will warn you is that whilst the locomotive, I believe, is set up to take a TTS sound chip, there aren't currently any T9 sound chips in the Hornby range, so you may have to look for something that's close approximation to it or go for a more expensive sound decoder. As far as I'm aware, I've not seen announced a T9 decoder forthcoming from Hornby, so it's not currently a model that they support in the TTS range. Once we remove the slip case, what we get inside is the model in the standard packaging. And actually on the back of this, I'm going to draw this to your attention, it gives you a history of the model. So you can see there, Dougal Drummond designed the successful T9 class 440 locomotive for express passenger work on the London and South Western Railway using the experience gained from the C8 class. And these were actually really successful. And we've got a drawing on there, just seeing the date. We've got 2011 on that drawing. So it is firmly within the super detailed, high quality range of models that Hornby have been bringing out. But the actual locomotive itself, I was just saying there, nicknamed Greyhounds because of their sprightly turn of speed, very popular with the locomotive crews, and quite long lasting, passing through into BR ownership. And of course, the one locomotive does survive, snapped up by the National Railway Museum, and it has run on the main line. And at the moment, I believe that it's at the Swanage Railway where its custodianship has been passed to them. So there was a little bit of controversy about that. People saying, why were they effectively handing over ownership of it to the Swanage Railway? But certainly it will get looked after down there. You can see here the green is actually this very light, it's almost like a pea green, and it actually matches the shade of green which the Adams Radial came out in from Oxford Rail. I believe that the previous release of this in pre-grouping guys had the slightly darker green livery. So if you've already got that, this is different to it. In the box we also get a detailing pack. We've got appear to be traction tyres. Now that is a bit of a surprise. I'm just looking there. It's hard to tell in the box. I will look in a bit. But we've also got front coupling. Looks to be an air tank or some kind of accumulation cylinder. We've got the brake rigging, and there's a second coupling there as well. I believe that with the NEM pocket is going to be for, actually that might be the rear coupling, and that the front coupling. So we've got all of that, some vacuum pipes as well, all in this bag for the user to fit. Now some of this I will try and fit, other things it's a case of they can be a little bit of a compromise for getting round tighter corners. Pretty standard clamshell. I'm just going to remove the little piece of plastic there that's just to stop the clamshell from rubbing in transit. And we can see here the locomotive in all of its glory, and really that is glorious. I've always loved pre-grouping liveries, and this really quite light London South Western Railway liveries, no exception. And actually I have seen the darker green that London South Western Railway did use. In fact, Hornby have released the M7 in that, and I know that certainly before lockdown started, Tim at Arcadia Models, which is where this came from, although I did pay full price for it, but happens to be where I bought it from, he did still have some of the NRM edition M7s in the pre-grouping livery. It's a little bit darker. In fact, I'm just gonna grab that, and you can see the difference in the two different London South Western Railway liveries. With the darker green, a lot more lining. This lighter green, I really do quite like it actually. It must have been absolute hell to keep clean back in the day, I must admit. And it does show off the detail on the model. It's actually quite an unforgiving colour. And it's such that I suppose it's quite daring. You have to be very confident in the finish and accuracy of your model to contemplate painting it in this kind of a livery, because any glaring errors are going to show up really quite badly with this livery. I've not spotted any yet, so that doesn't mean to say I'm going to find any. But certainly it really does bring out some of that detail. So we've got on the boiler cladding, some of the pipe work there, you can see that really quite clearly. Now it is moulded on, I'm just looking very closely at that, but it does follow the shape of the boiler incredibly well. You can see there at the front the way it follows the curve round heading towards the cylinder block at the front. The splashes on this We've got a multi-stage of splashes. So we've got the main splashes at the back with this very simple white lining and then the black surrounds as well. It really does bring that out. The white isn't actually necessarily so obvious until you get quite close to it, but it is very well done. It follows the contours of that so well, and you can even see just down there in the corner, you see how it changes shape to match the change in shape of those splashes. Very, very Victorian, late Victorian, early Edwardian style to these. So actually a lot of curves, a lot of thought into the aesthetics as well. And we've got this second set of splashes there, you can see, with the humps front and back and a long bit in between. And what that actually is that's the recess where the connecting rods go up and down in. So they're quite necessary to stop the connecting rod from making contact with the running plate. One of the other areas that's immediately quite obvious in there is we've got a representation of the motion and pipe work just inside the frames, and you can see in there we've got all of that detail. It's something which I've commented on with other models as well, that when you can see the gap underneath the boiler, this does dramatically improve a model by giving you a depth to it. The detail doesn't just end at the point that it becomes difficult to see. It's all in there. We've also got some separately applied metal handrails. You can just see there at the side. Really nicely done. And then we've got this separately applied copper type piping. It is moulded plastic by the look of it, but the rendition of that copper is actually quite credibly done. Now, metallic pipes are an area that's often quite difficult to replicate in model form if you're trying to make them out of plastic, but Hornby have done a very credible go at this. You can see, compared to the metal wire handrails, it's not quite so fine, but the colour does bring that out well. And you can see there again, it follows that splasher really nicely with a curved end there. And then we've got the second pipe up here, again separately applied detail up to this expansive extra pipe work on top of the boiler. The whistle feels like it could be metal. I don't want to really push that to the test, because breaking it is not really something I want to do, but certainly that whistle feels pretty robust, and it's quite small because I can feel it's quite sharp when you rest your finger on it, and there's a lot of inherent strength in there, which is good to see. Safety valves on top of the dome, and they are recessed in as well correctly as per the prototype. That is actually quite a nice touch. And you can see how they're separately turned, and these I think are metal, and they sit in the recess there, and it does look good. And this is somewhere where this really light colour is very unforgiving if you get things wrong, so it's nice to see that they've got things very right. The actual funnel there as well, we've got this almost like a windshield around the front. I'm guessing that helped tremendously with either steaming or at speed. It just helped to lift the smoke so it didn't get in the way of the driver's forward view. The front of the locomotive, the front face, is captured really, really well. Just looking in there, there's so much separately applied detail. We've got these lamp irons on there, separate. I think they could even be metal. Just turning it there against the light, and you can see how fine that detail is. Smokebox dart as well, separately applied metal. And then we've got that handrail which goes all around the front, again following the contours that it needs to. And that rivet detail really is nicely done. They've captured the look and face of this locomotive perfectly. We've also got the front buffer being painted there in the red. I'm just going to try these buffers, and yes, these are sprung. I know that some people are fascinated by the idea of sprung buffers. You know, it's nice to see them. It does feel like a quality item. Not much use in model form, to tell you the honest truth, but it's nice to see that they're there with turned metal buffer heads. Now, one thing I have noticed So if we look to the front bogie assembly, I really like how they've got this kind of characteristic bulge where the mounting point is. They've got the angles, the rivet detail all absolutely correct in there. And it is centre sprung, which is so helpful for guiding these through point work. It just does add a lot to the grace of this thing when it's running. And I've said this before, back in the old days, we used to have a front bogie that was attached by a drawbar to somewhere back here, and on the corners it would swing right out and look silly. And you don't get that with this because it's sprung exactly the same way as the prototype would be. One of the good things about this as well, being 440, you can see there we've also got pickups on that front bogie. Very important for good electrical conductivity. A little bit surprised to see we've got traction tyres there on the front. I'm going to see how well this runs. I've got no doubts for it. Just looking to the tender actually. Do we have tender pickups as well? We do appear to have tender pickups. I can just see, I think, just underneath those wheels. It's a little bit difficult to see, but it would seem sensible for tender pickups. And you can see there as well, the tender drawbar does have a second setting. You could just see that second hole at the front, so you can closer couple the locomotive to the tender if you either put this in a display cabinet or you just want to have slightly less steep corners on your layout, and then you can close couple these a little bit. But the fact it's screwed in front and back, I'm a great advocate of this because it does avoid putting stress on that cable, because otherwise the older way of doing this was that it would just have a pin and hole at one end, and they could become detached, and you'd end up pulling the train unbeknownst to yourself that it was just pulling it by the wire, which you don't want to put any stress on that plug. So it's good to see that they've thought about the long-term reliability. When it comes to running, it's actually really quite smooth. You can see here, just got it running in reverse, and it is handling the entirety of my top test track, which includes just over in that corner, a really tight corner. The whole thing has handled that with the greatest of ease. Coming down the hill, the back EMF on that Trainomatic decoder works really well, so we've not got any jerkiness whatsoever. It's got round the tightest curve on the test track, which is actually just slightly less than radius 1. It's not recommended to run your locomotive down to that. You can see just how gracefully it takes the corners with that centre sprung front pickup, and it's handling the point work pretty well. It's getting around even that really tight point work, and normally tender locomotives don't really like this part of the layout. This is getting round absolutely perfectly. The locomotive is coupled with the very characteristic water cart tender. You can see there, inside frame, 8 wheels, and the whole purpose of this was that it had a larger water capacity that increased the range of the real locomotive. And it's really nicely realised. I must admit, the water cart tender is something that whenever I've seen these in catalogues, it's always caught my eye, so it's nice to finally have one. You can see actually how huge that tender is. I'm going to just put it there next to that M7 that's still down here. And the tender is really quite huge when you think about it. On the top you can see the representation of the coal load. That is actually really nicely done. It is a plastic insert, but the coal does look very genuine. And as you can see, this does fiddle out, so you can just slide that out, and we've got the tender as empty. All the rivet detail is correct, but it does mean that you can replace that with your own load of coal if you so desire, or indeed model it with a small amount of coal, or indeed heat the thing right up. But I tend to just leave these in. Certainly on this model, that is actually a pretty good representation of the coal. Other detail on the model, I really love that brake wheel there, and you can see with the curved spokes on that wheel. I love that kind of design. It does look very eye-catching. Looking back into the cab, we've got a fall plate there. I'm not sure if it's posable. It's made of metal and it is fairly firmly attached, but really nicely done. You've got almost like a checker plate effect in there. So you can just see there, really nice, and that checker plate matches some parts on the tender as well. And looking into the cab, we've got a lot of detail on that. We've got the sight gauges on the boiler look real. We've also got needles and markings on all the gauges. There's two different gauges up there at the top. One of them I think is the boiler pressure gauge, the one on the right, but the one on the left actually looks like a thing which measures amperes, but it's probably more likely something like brake pressure. But so much separately applied detail, and I do like those porthole windows there. The glazing is flush, and if there is a glazing bar, I can't actually detect it. It's been incredibly well done. You can see there flush at the front as well. So nicely done. That is one of the best cab interiors. There's just nothing I can really fault in there actually, and that light colour that we can see that it's all painted in, it's so hard to focus on this, really does bring out the detail. I mean, you have to really be confident in the standard of your model to paint it in such a light livery, because quite frankly, this is the sort of livery that if there's anything wrong with your model, this will show it up. So it does take some real confidence to put something out in a livery like this. The connecting rods, metal, correctly fluted, really nicely done. The wheels picked out in, again, that really attractive green. It really does bring out this model. We've got more pipework and detail on that chassis. It's one of the more detailed chassis actually. Very subtle, but it's there, all that detail. I do like it. And just looking there, really nicely done. We've got the lining picked out and the steps, the splashers, and the number 120. We've got this kind of drop shadowing, really crisp and very well realised. Same for the LSWR on the tender. There really just isn't anything out of place. Looking to the back of the tender, again, sprung buffers. We've got the vacuum brake standard there as well, factory fitted, and really nice that it's, you can see there, it's actually painted in the body colour. And this lining, straight and true, got lamp brackets on the back, really nicely done. And I like all this detail as well at the back, really nice. And you can see the couplings go in there in an M pocket. That is something that I will be fitting, obviously. To look to the front of the locomotive, the NEM pocket's in there, but the coupling is not pushed in. There doesn't actually appear to be a way of removing that NEM pocket, but it's not too obtrusive at all. Right, next thing up, I'm going to open up the detail bag, and what I want to do is to fit some of the detail. So we do have in the detail bag, you can see here, a couple of spare traction tyres. Now, I'm not a huge fan of traction tyres, but I suspect that they've proven necessary for traction with the locomotive. You've got to keep these clean, and I know from days of running Hornby 00 diesel locomotives that were fitted with traction tyres, if you get oil contaminations on these, they do get quite slick. Looking to some of the other detail parts, one thing I am going to fit is that rear coupling, although we'll have to take that off in a moment for the DCC fitting, because there is a screw hidden away underneath. The brake rigging, I have to say it's something that does add to a model, but I always hate fitting it myself. So I think what we've got there, this is for the tender. I'm going to go ahead and fit these. I'm not going to film it because it'll be fiddly, but it does improve the look. So as you can see here, I've fitted some of the extra detail. The front coupling hook, vacuum standard, I'm fitting those because I'm not going to fit the front coupling, that's fine. And again, at the back here, I've got the brake rigging in the tender, but it didn't feel like it was fitting. They just didn't seem quite wide enough to go in place. So I've left it off the locomotive, but it went on really quite easily on the tender. Now there's also a sort of a reservoir tank, which is an either or fitting with the coupling. I'm going to use the coupling, so I haven't fitted it, but the centre of that air tank, which you can just see the ends of at the back, is also provided. And again, there's an extra pipe for the back, which you can only fit if you're not going to be using the coupling. I'm going to be doing a DCC fitting guide now in association with Trainomatic, and for this I've chosen their standard wired 8-pin decoder, and it's perfect for this job. First up, I'm just going to show you the instructions actually, because these are pretty good, and you can see here that the T9 does come with 2 tender options depending on which version you get. We've got the 8-wheel water cart, but there is a 6-wheel tender version available as well. And it does give you actually, if I turn this over, I'll just show you some of the detail for how to fit some of the extra detail, which is really useful. And it's great when manufacturers do that, because sometimes they do leave you all in your own. They give you all this amazing detail stuff and they never tell you where to put it. But on the water cart tender, we're going to have to take that coupling back out to access that screw that's underneath. And it actually does look from this illustration as if this locomotive isn't actually ready for a TTS decoder. I was wondering why there was no TTS fitted version in the range, so we're going to have a look in there. But I think that the mounting point for the TTS speaker, which you normally find in a Hornby locomotive, may not necessarily be in this. It may be just slightly too old a design to have had that designed in. So first things first, let's get this coupling out. I use the flathead jeweler's screwdriver, support on top. You just lever that very easily out. Screwdriver into that screw. We're going to just undo that. Now if you fitted the brake rigging like I have, it's very easy to just knock that clear at this point. You can see it's ever so springy. I should probably have fitted this afterwards. And it's very easy to knock out the bit that you've already fitted. We'll come back to that. And just going to wiggle this according to the instructions. Just wiggle that and lever it out and down, and the tender top does just come off. And I'm just looking in there. We've got some metal weights in there. There's no recess underneath there. They have put some black tape on, and that's probably so that when you DCC fit it, the decoder is much less likely to strike bare metal. There is a lot of room inside this water cart tender, it has to be said, so a sound fitting option should be an absolute doddle if that's the route you want to go down. Inside, as you'll see, there's no fitting for a speaker, but we've got that standard 8-pin decoder socket in the middle. Again, I'm going to use the flathead screwdriver, just gently work it one side, then the other. And we can lever that out. And then you'll immediately see just there, pin 1 is marked up. And this is always important. Always make sure that you get your decoder the correct way around. So we can see there, standard NMRA wiring. We're looking for the orange pin, and that is always pin 1. And we're going to line that up with the arrow that's on the decoder socket. So it's just simply a case of just making sure you don't bend any of the pins. Line them all up. Once you're happy that they are going into those holes, it's just a little bit reluctant on this one. There we are. I think I've got it. Just rocking it backwards and forwards. Don't just push from one side, because you may end up damaging your decoder. And you can see there it's quite tight on this, but we've got it to go all the way home. So I'm quite happy with that. And in terms of space, we have loads of space inside this tender for the decoder. I'm just going to tuck it in there, and then we just need to make sure that none of those wires are going to catch, and then it's just a reversal of that process to get this to go back in. Just looking there. And drop that in, and make sure the screw is back in the hole. And as I always say with these, don't over tighten it because you run the risk of stripping the thread. You just tighten it up until you can feel a small amount of resistance, and that's when you stop. I'm just going to try and fix this brake rigging, and then of course we've got to refit the coupling, make sure it's the right way up into that triangular tail and just push down, and there we have it, an easy fit for the 8-pin decoder. Just going to put this now onto the programming track, and then we're going to see how it runs. I've paired the locomotive up with some of the Hornby 4-wheel coaches, and it handles this load exceptionally well. The London and South Western Railway coaches that are announced in the Hornby range are not yet coming through, but when they do, they will be a perfect addition to this locomotive. Those traction tyres actually do radically increase the haulage capacity, but at the same time they don't seem to make it struggle at all with electrical conductivity. It's got pickups in all wheels, including the tender, and that is making a huge difference. It's about to run through a double slip now. This is the standard Pico Code 100 double slip, and as you can see, it handles it without even breaking a sweat. So in terms of all of the different types of track work, from gradients, up and down transitions, point work, right through to some quite severe double slips and junctions, this locomotive has handled everything I can throw at it. Haulage capacity is actually far above what I would have expected from a 440 wheel arrangement, in part down to those traction tyres. Hornby have of course supplied a spare set, and with their conrod removal tool it is actually quite an easy job to get in there to replace those, although I'm not sure quite how quickly that's likely to be needed. Overall, running on this locomotive is absolutely perfect. When it comes to the scores, this model really is impressing me. I had high hopes for it in the start, but the more I've got to look at this, the more impressed I am. First up is finish, and the livery application is really well done. It is simpler than a lot of other liveries I've seen, but as you can see, those boiler bands, they're very, very fine, but quite nicely done. There's a slight degree of fuzziness on the white on the outside, but it's not really noticeable unless you get very, very close. I like the way that the lining follows the contours of the bodywork perfectly, just like on the full-size prototype. And where it needs to be absolutely straight, it is straight and true. There's no real fuzziness around any of the lining on the tender or the rest of the locomotive, and I like that drop shadowing effect on the gold finish letters and numbers. They really do work well. Inside the cab it is just sublime, and the fact that we can even read the dials on the back head is so nicely done. All in all, I have to say this model seriously impressed me, and I'm going to give it a 9.7 out of 10. On functionality, it ran really well. I've always been skeptical of locomotives with traction tyres until I met this example. And actually, those traction tyres on this have really upped the performance considerably without compromising anything else. It has all-wheel pickup, and when I say that, I mean all-wheel, including the tender and the front bogie. And that means that any potential loss of power pickup from that wheels with the rubber traction tyres is mitigated ever so well. On running, it didn't really stutter. At low speeds there was a small amount of notchiness from the motor, but that cleared up as we sped it up, and actually the more I ran this, the smoother it got, so it will probably benefit from a little bit of running in. But the performance was still perfectly acceptable out of the box. The haulage capacity was well above what I was expecting for a 440. I've grown used to ones that come without traction tyres that struggle somewhat to get their grip and tend to spin up their drive wheels. I saw no hint of spinning on this, and it handled prototypical loads really, really well. So I'm going to give this a 9.9 out of 10. On ease of use, that DCC fitting was really easy. There's just that one screw to remove, and inside the tender, even though it doesn't natively come supporting a TTS sound decoder, there is still a lot of space in there, and I see no problem whatsoever to fit even quite a large speaker along with a sound decoder, and even a stay alive if you really wanted to, without being pushed to find the space to fit it in inside that tender. It really was easy to get the decoder in. There was just no messing about. The tender top goes on and off really well, and I just felt that this was a perfectly designed way of doing a DCC fit. So I'm going to give this a 10 out of 10. When it comes to aesthetics, well, I'm sure you'll agree with me that this locomotive's livery is so incredibly well realised. It is simpler than some liveries that I've seen, but it works, and this light green is exquisite. The area that really stood out for me is inside that cab, and when we focus in on that backhead detail, the fact that we've got gauges, sight glasses, all of that separately applied material in there really does stand out for me, and I'm particularly impressed that there's no hint of a glazing bar. If it is in there, it's well hidden, so we get this flush finish on the porthole windows on the cab front there, both inside and outside. And because it's got this nice open back with no tender back, we can see all of that. It really does add to this model, so I'm going to give this a 9.9 out of 10. On value for money, this model was quite expensive. It's been in the Hornby range for a good number of years, and it does keep on giving year after year that it appears. I paid around the £150 mark for this, so it's probably well within the ballpark of current pricing. Certainly we've started to see locomotives go well north of the £200 mark, so I suppose we've just got to get used to this. It didn't feel over expensive, I didn't feel that it was overpriced, but it's certainly up there at quite an expensive price, but they are selling. This livery does mean that these are not going to hang around. I bought mine from Arcadia Models, and I did ask Tim how many he had left, and he said that they were selling incredibly well, and he had only 3 more to go. So I guess £150 is a very fair price, and the market has spoken by buying them at that price, and they will buy them all, and they will sell out. And if this is a model that you really want, then that is the price that you have to expect to pay. So I'm going to give this an 8.9 out of 10. And that gives us a final score of 48.4. This is a great locomotive. I love these pre-grouping liveries, and it is so nice that Hornby has brought us this again in the pretty London and South Western Railway livery, just in time to be ready for when those 4 and 6 wheel coaches come out in the appropriate matching livery. Get your order in for those as well, because I think they're going to sell out incredibly well. There's a lot of these locomotives that have already been sold, and those owners are going to be looking for something for this locomotive to pull. Get your skates on, because if you snooze, you lose. This is a really beautiful locomotive, and I am quite pleased to be able to add it to my collection. Well, I hope you really enjoyed today's video, and don't forget, if you did, please consider liking this video and sharing it to let as many people know as possible. And if you haven't already done so, do consider subscribing to the channel and you'll be the first to know about new videos as and when they go up. And if you really like the look of today's model, you're going to have to do a little bit of legwork, I'm afraid. It has proven very, very popular. Now, I have found one or two of these out and about there. Tim at Arcadia Models in Shaw, where I got this one from, at the time that I bought it, said that he had 3 more left, but they are going to go really, really fast. On top of that, I believe I found one at Durham Trains of Stanley, and indeed Lord and Butler's as well. I saw one listed on their website, so you're going to have to look around, but they are still out there to find if you hunt hard enough. But until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying you take really great care of yourself. I hope to see you back next time. Take care, happy modelling. Bye for now. Today's video is sponsored by Train-O-Matic, makers of DCC decoders designed to be fully compatible with every manufacturer's locomotive. Visit train-o-matic.com to browse the full range and see what they've got suitable for you. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Wayne Johns, Offshore Allen, oorail.co.uk, Michael Lockie, Helen Sink, Peter Bolton, Brian and Dorothy Mudd, Gary Lewis, David Quinn, Sparky107107, George Botterini, Andy Finch, Chris Moss, Robert Steers, MD of San Juan Model Company and Grantline Products, Sam Yates, John N from NC, and NYMR-ish. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.